So what we're going to be doing under the first year is to just try to get a handle on the relationship between the watersheds and the coastal waters, looking at the budget of what's coming down. The relationship using a model that Eric Wolanski developed is called the HOME model, based on hydrology, oceanography, meteorology, and ecology. And what we do is put out turbidity meters along with YSI instruments to be able to measure sediment flow, turbidity, temperature, salinity, and we can track these plumes after these rain events. And we can also take a look at resuspension. This is from the YSI instrument showing about a little over, this is a month in 2001, where you can see, here's our salinity. We had a rainstorm here. You had a peak in turbidity here. But interestingly enough, here was a dry period with absolutely no rainfall whatsoever. But we had a big southern swell coming in, about 3 to 5 meter waves coming in. And you can see over 1,000 NTUs just from resuspension of accumulated sediment. So under these conditions, a reef can never exist or recover. So on to Mauna Lua Bay then. It's a very extensive bay from Diamond Head over to Hawaii Kai. It's made up of about 8 sub-watersheds, all of which have been channelized with the exception, well, Wailupe has been channelized as well, but at least there's a little bit of natural slowing down that occurs in there. Probably the most affected one is Kuli'o'o, and if you take a look at the channelization here, this is on a dry day, this is on a wet day, and Jerry Davis actually has a photograph of this overflowing the walls of the channel. What basically the Army Corps has done is moved everything from the very, very upper reaches of the base of the mountains right down into the ocean with a very rapid movement of stuff coming down. And everyone knows volume and velocity. That's where it's at. Boulders this big. We're not talking about particles of sediment anymore. You can see the boulders rolling down and getting into the ocean from this area. And again, it's all about taking the water off the land and dumping it in the ocean. Interestingly, this next one, this is still in the Kuli'o'o watershed. When they did the new building up of the Kalanianiole Highway, they raised the highway but didn't do anything about the drainage. So we have a bunch of these concrete channels here that flood and then just sit there, and they're full of gasoline and pesticides and agrochemicals, and then it evaporates down. Then it fills up and evaporates down. It does this about 8 times, and you should see it's like tar and slick stuff at the bottom. And then you get a big rainfall, and then this big pulse of toxicants goes out into the bay all at once. And of course, you know what the results are there. So we started last year working with Malama Mauna Lua just to try to get a handle on what's out here. So we have a number of sites that we did just some of the toxicant analysis. And as one would expect, we've got the typical rogues gallery, fluoranthene, which comes from hydrocarbons. And fluoranthene is particularly interesting because it's a phototoxic substance. So fish that are exposed to it, if they're under a culvert, they're fine. If they come out into the sunlight, they're dead within 30 seconds. We have a number of pesticide hits out in this area as well. We went further down Paiko coastline. This one was actually pretty clean compared to what we found coming out of the Kuli'o'o area. And then down into Wailai Beach on the far side over by Kahala, we got some pretty good pesticide hits too. So we know there's a sediment carrier issue going on. There's a pollution issue going on. So what we're going to be doing then is, in phase 1, is to model the watershed to get an idea of the extent and to get an idea of the volume and to be able to measure the physical impacts within the bay over a variety of rainfall events. What we're also doing is matching this with some of our biological work on biomarkers, because the presence of a toxicant doesn't necessarily mean it's biologically relevant. So even if we are detecting fluoranthene, anthracene, even if we're picking up some of the pesticides that are very commonly used around here, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's having a biological effect. So what we're also doing then is matching these profiles of watershed discharges with areas in which we're able to detect an upregulation of proteins within corals like cytochrome P450 systems that are pretty indicative of exposure to a variety of toxicants. And once we have a feeling on that, what we're able to do in watersheds in Guam, in Pohnpei, and in Palau was then to use these data in collaboration with the local community to point out what the major issues were. The community then used the data to turn around and make some very good policy decisions. In Palau, for example, the big issue was cutting mangroves down to build housing developments, and they were just filling the mangrove area. And when we provided them with the data, what we did in essence was validate what the fishermen knew. But that encouraged them to the point that they went to their traditional leaders and to the elected officials in HCRI community, and within 6 weeks of the presentation of the data, they put a full moratorium on any clearing and grading of the mangroves. And 4 years after the fact, it's still in place. In the case of Pohnpei, their problem was clearing the upland rainforest for cacao farming. That's their major cash crop. And as a result of it, we were getting huge sediment impacts coming all the way down through the watersheds, out through the mangroves. And they actually, one community did establish an MPA, but the MPA was totally ineffective because the fish couldn't handle the habitat changes. Through the Conservation Society of Pohnpei, Willie Kostica, some of you may know him, he was able to convince the chiefs to put an integrated protected area that started in the uplands of the rainforest, came all the way down through the mangroves and out to their MPA, and we're now working with that community. And in the case of Guam, one of the big issues was burning. The poachers were lighting fires to burn off the swordgrass, and as a result, we were getting tremendous amounts of sediment coming down as well. So what's encouraging about this, and I think the shift that Mike talked about, was we have a community in Hawaii that has already taken a lot of initiative. They've actually raised their own funding to get their own coordinator, Alyssa Miller, who was here before. TNC is involved in the work, and what they've really asked for now is scientific support to help them collect the data that they need to be able to then develop the political will to go forward. And that's part of what, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but I think one of the issues that will be discussed for next year in Hickory and in the other project, the Kahikili, that Celia will talk about, is a concept of bringing science in a supporting role to help communities that are already engaged in trying to do something. And it really does start with a consensus to realize there's a problem. So what we're going to try to do is provide them with data and options so that they can then determine what to do to move forward. Thank you very much.